Hello and welcome to another episode of Modern Infrastructure Wednesday. I'm your host, Lee Zen. Today we're going to be covering traffic management with NS1. What is traffic management? Traffic management is the concept of using DNS to have your clients and end users go to certain endpoints based on various criteria and rules. In NS1, we're going to be creating some DNS zones and records. We're going to be setting up filter chains and answer groups. And then we're going to, in today's example, route traffic based on geographic regions. Filter chains are NS1's construct for deciding how to provide a set of answers. They are filters, as the name implies, a way to use metadata about the records and the users and other conditions to filter the right answers back. And you can use answer groups to group sets of answers together. Filter chains are super powerful. You can filter a whole set of information ranging from application health to latency to geographic region. Today, like I mentioned, we're going to go through a simple example. Before I get showing that example, please make sure you subscribe to Pulumi TV. Hit that like button below. We love to hear your feedback. Please leave some comments in the video after you've watched it. And yeah, let's get started. So I have this empty Pulumi program. I've already imported the NS1 provider, or really added it to my package JSON and installed it using npm. So now we can import the provider. And we're going to start by creating a zone. And this will be, we'll just call it Pulumi TV. And it takes a zone parameter. We'll give it this name. All right. And then we're going to create a record. So we can actually do DNS. And the record takes a domain. In our case, it's going to be, we're just going to call it demo. Takes a type. It's an A record. And it takes a zone. This is just the previous zone. And it also takes, obviously, answers, since we should return something. We can just give it an answer here. And that's it. And then we're going to export the name servers from the zone so we can actually do some inspection of this at the end. So let's run Pulumi up. So you can see it's going to create the zone and the record. And we're all done. And we can query the name servers directly to find out if everything's working. So we can dig at the name server. So this is using authoritative DNS. We're skipping our recursive resolver and asking NS1 directly. What is the value for demo.pulumi.tv? And you can see it's 1234, which is what we expect. So great success there. Now let's do the second part of what we talked about, which is adding the filter chains and answer groups. So let's start with the filter chains. And so we can add some filters. And let's talk about the first filter we want to add. Has to have a name for the filter, and it's the type of the filter. Let's refer to the NS1 documentation, and you can see we want to use this geo-target regional filter. And it takes some config, but we don't need any. And then we'll add another filter, and that one is to take the first group. This is select first end. Here I actually want to select first region. Region actually in this case does not refer to the geographic region, but in this terminology refers to the group, the answer group actually. And you'll see why in a second. We're going to create some regions. And here you can see this is what I'm talking about. A region is actually an answer group in the NS1 UI, but for legacy regions, it's called regions from an API perspective. So we're going to create those regions. Regions have a name. In our example today, we're going to be splitting our traffic between the west coast of the United States and the east coast. So we'll call this west. This name has no meaning. It's a name we want to call the group. And so I'm just calling it west, so I know what it represents. And I'm going to give it some, do the same thing with east. And these groups can actually have some metadata attached to them. And so we're going to attach some metadata. And these are key value pairs. In our case, we want to use geo region. copy this whole block. And so what this basically is saying is that records that belong to the West group should be tagged with the, have the metadata that they are part of the US West geo region. And same thing with the records that belong to the East group. So how do we make these records belong to groups? These answers belong to groups, rather. We can actually add them to the answer group. And so we can give it a region. And oops, I believe this actually takes, this just takes a string. And so the region this belongs to is West. You can actually also add metadata directly to each answer. So you could also imagine tagging this with a georegion or various other things that the filter chain can use. But in our case, we're not going to do that because we already have the metadata just from the group itself. So let's create a few more answers here to make this interesting. So we'll create a couple West answers, and then we'll create a couple East answers. And so now let's run Pulumi up. So we have a couple records that belong to the West group, a couple records that belong, oops, that's a mistake. Let's not run that. Let's run that again. We have a couple records that belong to the West group, a couple records that belong to the East group. And then we've also said that any records, any answers rather, not records, any answers that are part of the West group are tagged with this US West georegion, and same thing with East correspondingly. And then when someone queries for our records, or for our answers, they should get back answers that are the closest geo-target region, and then we should select the first region. So if we run that query again, we should expect to get back just the West answers, since I'm based in Seattle. And that's what happens. We get back just the answers for the West. We can also test to see that this works for the East by providing a subnet. So the way that this works is basically saying, this is giving it the EDNS option client subnet, which is basically telling the authoritative name server that, the client that is querying is actually coming from this IP range. This happens to be in US East 1 for AWS. And if we do that, you can see we get back the East answers. So works exactly as we expect. And yeah, that's really what I wanted to go through today, just showing kind of, how easy it is to get going with NS1 and how easy it is to set up filter chains and really just a few lines of code in Pulumi. And then obviously you can totally imagine, adding more complexity if you need to route appropriately. And the routing doesn't just have to be based on static information like we have here, where the information is provided statically, but it can also be provided based on real-time information, such as I mentioned earlier, integrating the health of your endpoint. So you can imagine, for each of these answers, we could also add a meta here, where we have metadata about the health of that application as through an integration. And there's actually if we go back to the documentation, there's ways to do that via monitoring and other data sources. And then we can use that information to then route appropriately based on the health and various other factors of the endpoints. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Like I mentioned at the beginning, please make sure you subscribe to Pulumi TV so you can get updates on all our episodes. And we'll see you next week on Modern Infrastructure Wednesday. Thanks very much.